Jeff Peterson of Heartland Farm Partners is our grain analyst this week. We caught up with Jeff on Wednesday afternoon to get the latest information on the factors that are influencing the commodity trade. We began the conversation by asking him about the best way to describe the current corn and soybean markets. We're joined now by Jeff Peterson. He's the president of Heartland Farm Partners. Jeff, thanks for coming back to Market Journal. Good to see you.
You bet. It's great to be here, and it's always fun to talk about these markets.
A lot of things going on in the market. So let's begin with this question. How would you describe the current situation for corn and soybean, the markets and the trends that you're seeing right now?
You know, it's been interesting. When we go back, take ourselves all the way back to February 24th, when we put in some of those spike highs across corn, soybeans, and wheat. And, you know, some of the markets we've came back up in there and got close to taking them out. Actually, as of last Friday, we had some new high closes. Not a new high move, but we had a new high close. You know, we've just kind of been trending sideways here until we had today's action, which pushed a lot of, market pressure on the markets here. And they're really just kind of sitting here, and the way I describe it, Bryce, they're kind of coiling here, I'd say. Just kind of looking for those next pieces of information to know which way they're going to go ahead and move from here.
Well, the markets are certainly keeping a close eye on the situation with Ukraine and Russia still. As we have this conversation today, I thought it'd be interesting to dive a little bit deeper in the old crop. We'll hit on the new crop here in a second, but what do we know about in Ukraine, the old crop that's still on farms right now?
You know, that's some of the challenge that they've got right now. You know, they exported 95% of the grain actually went out their ports. You know, the rest of it would make its way out of the country by rail. And right now they don't have that ability to get out, so it's really backed up in there. Our estimation would be, from what we're hearing, you know, on the corn side, they were planning to, USDA had them exporting about 1.3 billion. There's still about 580 million bushels of corn still physically either combination of in the grain buyers or out on, the farmer storage. And then over on the wheat side, you actually still had probably about 250 million bushels plus still in on-farm storage. So, that's quite a bit of grain still sitting on farm and in the grain buyers.
Do we write that off at this point, or do we say when this conflict is hopefully resolved someday, that is back in play in the market?
Yeah, that's what the market's working through right now. I'd say right now it's setting off to the side. There is some exports going out of the country, though. They are shipping out about 780,000 bushels per day by rail. And that's something that they didn't do much of before, but they are doing that. But keep in mind, their normal pace should be about 10 times that. So what that'll look at is that some of that grain will get used domestically within, but down the road, the market's trying to assess, okay, how much of that actually moves this year? Because if it doesn't move for this crop year, and keep in mind for USDA, that crop year ends on August 31st for that 2021 crop. If it doesn't move this year, then ultimately somebody else somewhere across the world, probably the U.S., will have to step in and supply more on the corn side. Wheat, necessarily, there's more suppliers than that, but we also know the challenge we run into is that we have to also talk about Russia. Since they're the number one exporter of wheat, there's also bushels there that there's a little unknown on what's going to happen with those bushels.
So unknown, we've got a lot of questions on the old crop, but even more questions perhaps when it comes to the new crop. What are you hearing right now out of Ukraine on the possibility of getting a crop of the ground here come April? Yeah,
so that's a big concern. So let's kind of lay things out. So they've got wheat. They've got a wheat crop going. They also have a little bit of, and that's a hard red winter wheat crop, so that would have been in the ground. That makes up about 90% of their wheat. The other 10% would be spring wheat here, but they do have quite a bit of that wheat needs to be top dressed with nitrogen yet, so that's a concern there. In addition, you've got their planting season really close. So what you've got is that probably by starting mid-April and would like to be wrapped up towards the end of May, you got corn planting to get started. You've got sunflowers to get in as you get in towards the latter part of April. And from what we're hearing out there, the big concern, two big things come up. Obviously there's concern about fertilizer and chemicals and seed, but a lot of the suppliers have a feeling that they've got enough supply. It's whether or not they can get it to the farmer. Big concern ultimately becomes the fuel. We're hearing some reports that some farmers have enough fuel, but most of them do not have enough fuel, and that becomes a big concern. The other one I hadn't thought a lot about, but it's popping up more and more since these farmers have so much grain left yet to ship out. It's having the dollars to be able to pay for everything. So I know there's some programs that are being talked about from the Ukraine government. Question will be, how much funding do they have to try to maybe get them some extra money, maybe for some bushels that they still have in on-farm storage. Our thought would be, you could have a 10 to 15% reduction on the wheat just because or it could be bigger because of the ability not to necessarily get the fertilizer on you needed or maybe the fungicides. Over on the corn side, it's hard to know yet. Maybe we're talking a minimum of 20%, but it could be upwards of 35 or 40%. So that becomes a big number because you got to figure they produce about 1.7 billion bushels of corn.
A lot of questions, obviously, as I mentioned, when it comes to Ukraine right now, Jeff. Let's travel elsewhere in the world right now. An area where we had a lot of questions was South America. Are we getting some answers when it comes to their production and what some of those numbers might look like here as they get finalized?
Yeah, I do think so. You know, in the March WASDE report, we saw the numbers that came out from there. I think the yields down there are definitely stabilizing. It's improving yet. We may not have quite seen the lowest numbers yet out of Brazil and actually Argentina, but I think they're getting really close. But the thing we have to keep an eye on there yet is La Nina. La Nina still looks like it's going to hang around a while. That has two impacts for them. One of them is that you've still got some dryness that could show up in the southern parts of Brazil. That could impact that safrinha corn crop. Now that safrinha corn crop, that's the one that's getting planted right after these beans are harvested. You know, that's almost all planted now. The other side of that La Nina that we don't talk about a lot, though, is that could bring in an early frost. There's some talk about that could show up in the latter parts of May, and if that's the case, Paraná and southern parts of Mato Grosso do Sul could be impacted. And so those are the areas we have to really kind of look at and think about for the safrinha crop.
Let's check back in here with the United States as we continue our conversation, Jeff. Seth in South Central Nebraska asked this question. Are the grain prices we're seeing right now the new normal? What are your thoughts? You
know, every time we see a run up in price, there's a lot of talk about that. So that's a great question that Seth has. We heard that talk about back in 1995 and 96 when we went over $5. We heard some of that talk in 08 and then 2012. I wouldn't say this is a new normal. I would say that we've had some problems here on the supply side across the world, and as a result of that, the markets will adjust down the road. So at some point in here, you know, we'll have to get multiple year sales on, but I don't think that's the new normal for now.
Something else happening here in the U.S., we've got avian influenza. High-path avian influenza is back. First time since 2015. We've been talking about that here on the program as it has an impact on the poultry industry, of course. But when it comes to the grain market, are there anything in particular you're watching with that?
Yeah, we're continuing to watch it. I think the last count is about 7 million birds have been culled. You know, if you go back and look at the 2015, we've been up around the 50 million. So we aren't to that level yet. But, you know, every bushel that's physically not end up fed, we're watching it from the feed demand side. You know, could it get to a point that it's market moving with everything else we have on? No, we don't think so. But it's still something we have to watch, Bryce.
All right, Jeff, final word is yours. 30 seconds or so. What piece of risk management advice would you like to leave us with, or perhaps something we haven't had the chance to hit on yet?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we want to make sure we're doing now is make sure you are taking advantage of these higher prices. Even though we don't think that the highs have been put in yet, it's going to be very volatile. Price action back and forth, limit moves higher, limit moves lower. Just make sure you're managing risk through all this, Bryce.
Jeff, as always, it's great to have you here on Market Journal. Appreciate your insight.
You bet. Always enjoy it.